The boy was 9 years old, maybe 10. He was crouched behind a concrete planter outside the parking garage on Bay Street, and he was staring at Lawrence Holt like he had been waiting for him. Lawrence did not notice the boy at first. He was thinking about the drive home, about whether he had remembered to call his assistant back, about the slight tightness that had been sitting behind his left shoulder blade since Tuesday. He was 58 years old, a senior partner at Holt, Brennan and Associates, and he had learned long ago to move through the world with a kind of efficient blindness, to see only what required his attention and to let everything else pass by unregistered. The boy stepped forward. "Sir," he said, "don't get in your car." Lawrence stopped walking, not because the words alarmed him. They were strange, certainly, but a child saying strange things outside a parking garage in downtown Toronto was not, in itself, cause for alarm. He stopped because something in the boy's voice was flat and certain in a way that did not sound like a child playing a game. "Excuse me?" Lawrence said. "They put something on it," the boy said. "Your car, the black one on level 2. I saw them." Lawrence looked at him properly then. The boy was small, with close-cut hair and a red winter jacket that was a size too large. He was holding a backpack by one strap. His eyes were steady. There was no excitement in his face, no performance of importance. He looked like someone reporting a fact. "Who are you?" Lawrence asked. "My name is Noah," the boy said. "I was waiting for my uncle. He works in the building. I was sitting up there." He pointed toward the stairwell entrance near the top of the ramp. "I could see down to level 2. 2 men went to your car. I know it's yours because I saw you go in this morning. They were there for maybe 4 minutes. One of them had a bag." Lawrence looked at the stairwell. He looked at the boy. He thought about the drive home, about the tightness behind his shoulder blade, about the stack of files on his desk that would be there tomorrow. He had practiced law for 31 years. He had learned to read rooms, to read people, to weigh what was plausible against what was convenient to believe, and something in him, some professional instinct that lived below conscious thought, told him the boy was not lying. "What did they look like?" he asked. Noah described them quietly and without embellishment. One was tall, mid-30s, wearing a gray jacket. The other was shorter, stockier, with a blue toque pulled down low. They had come from the elevator, not the stairwell. They had gone directly to the black Lexus on level 2. The taller one had crouched beside the rear wheel on the driver's side. The other had stood at the end of the row and watched the elevator doors. Lawrence listened without interrupting. When the boy finished, Lawrence said, "Wait here," and he took out his phone and called his firm's security consultant, a man named Darren Hicks, who had spent 20 years with the OPP before Lawrence had brought him on as a private contractor. Darren answered on the 3rd ring. Lawrence told him what the boy had said. There was a silence. "Don't touch the car," Darren said. "Don't go near it. I'll call the city police, and I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay visible. Stay in a public space." Lawrence ended the call and looked at the boy, who was still standing there with his backpack strap in his hand. "Are you cold?" Lawrence asked. "A little," Noah said. "Come inside." They went into the lobby of the building, which was still open. Lawrence bought the boy a hot chocolate from the cafe near the security desk, and they sat in the chairs near the window that faced out onto Bay Street. Noah held the cup in both hands and did not say much. Lawrence asked him again about the men, and Noah told him again, and the second telling was identical to the first in every detail. Lawrence found that significant. He thought about the past few months. He thought about a case his firm had been handling, a protracted dispute over the dissolution of a private equity fund that had left several of the losing parties in a state of financial ruin. He thought about the threats that had been made, vague, deniable things, worded carefully enough to avoid criminal exposure, but threats nonetheless. He thought about a letter that had arrived at the firm 6 weeks ago, addressed to him personally, that the police had advised him to keep on file. He had not told his wife, Marion, about the letter. He thought about that now. He thought about the way Marion had been lately, the distance that had settled between them over the last year, the weekends she spent visiting her sister in Kingston, which had grown from occasional to regular to almost every other weekend without Lawrence ever consciously noting the shift. The phone she now kept face down on the counter. The way she looked at him sometimes across the dinner table, not with coldness exactly, but with an expression he could not read, which was unusual, because he had always been able to read Marion. He pushed the thought away. He was doing what he always warned his clients not to do, constructing a narrative before the evidence was in. The police arrived before Darren did. 2 officers from 52 Division, both young, both taking the situation with a seriousness that Lawrence appreciated. They sealed the level 2 entrance and called for a forensic unit. One of them came and took a statement from Noah, who answered every question clearly, and without wavering. Darren arrived while the statement was still being taken. He was a large, unhurried man with a gray beard, and he stood beside Lawrence and listened to the officer's questions and the boy's answers. And when it was over, he said quietly to Lawrence, "The kid is solid." "I know," Lawrence said. The forensic unit found a device attached to the undercarriage of the Lexus, fixed to the frame, near the fuel line. The officer who came to tell Lawrence did not use the word bomb. He said it was a destructive device and that the bomb disposal unit was on its way, and that they would know more shortly. Lawrence stood on the sidewalk on Bay Street in the January cold, and he looked at the lights of the office towers around him, and he thought about how close he had come to walking up that ramp alone and getting into his car. He turned and looked at Noah, who was standing a few feet away, still holding the empty hot chocolate cup. "You could have just walked away," Lawrence said. Noah looked at him. "I know," he said, "but you're a person." Lawrence did not have a response to that. He was not sure one existed. Darren arranged for a car to take Noah home once the police had finished with him. Noah's uncle had arrived by then, a quiet man named Trevor, who worked in the building's facilities department, and Trevor shook Lawrence's hand and apologized repeatedly, as though he were responsible for what had happened, which Lawrence found both touching and mildly heartbreaking. "Your nephew is remarkable," Lawrence told him. Trevor looked at the boy with something complicated in his expression. "He's always been like that," he said. "He notices things." Lawrence was taken to 52 Division to give his own statement. He sat across from a detective named Osi and answered questions for 2 hours. He told Detective Osi about the equity fund case, about the threatening letter, about the parties who had made clear their intention to hold him personally responsible for what had happened to their money detective. O listened and wrote and asked clarifying questions. He was methodical and unhurried, and at no point did he suggest that Lawrence was overreacting or imagining things. At the end of the 2 hours, he said, "We'll need to speak to everyone in your immediate circle, family, colleagues, anyone who knew your schedule." Lawrence said, "Of course." He called Marion from the waiting room. She answered on the second ring, and when he told her what had happened, she made the sounds a person makes when they have received a shock, small, involuntary sounds of disbelief. She said she was coming downtown. She said she would be there in 40 minutes. She arrived in 35, and she came through the door of 52 Division looking pale and frightened, and she put both arms around Lawrence and held on, and he held her back. He felt for a moment like a fool for the thoughts that had moved through him while he was sitting in the lobby with Noah. He felt ashamed of his own suspicion. They went home together in a car that the firm arranged, and that night Marion made tea and sat across from him at the kitchen table, and they talked until well past midnight, which they had not done in a long time. But the investigation had its own momentum, and it did not wait for Lawrence's feelings to settle. 3 days after the device was found on the Lexus, Detective Osi called Lawrence and asked him to come to the station. He said he had information he needed to share in person. Lawrence went alone. Osi was waiting for him in a small room with a table and 4 chairs. There was another detective present, a woman named Sylvie Tran, and their manner was careful in a way that told Lawrence before anyone spoke that what was coming was not going to be simple. The device, Osi explained, had been traced to a supplier in Hamilton. The supplier had been identified through a separate investigation and was already in custody. He had given them names. One of those names connected to a private security contractor who had worked at Lawrence's firm 3 years ago, a man named Curtis Beale, who had been quietly let go after a discrepancy in expense reporting. The other name connected to someone who had been in contact with Beale within the last 6 weeks. Osi placed a printed transcript on the table between them. Lawrence looked at it. The transcript showed a series of text messages, anonymous numbers, but the content was specific. It mentioned Lawrence by name. It mentioned his schedule, his car, his parking level. It mentioned a payment. Some of the details in those messages, the car, the parking level, the pattern of Lawrence's arrivals and departures, were things that very few people would have known. Osi let him read. Then he said quietly, "Mr. Holt, does your wife know your office parking schedule?" Lawrence set the transcript down. The room was very quiet. He said, "Yes." The weeks that followed were the hardest of his life. Not because of the legal process, that at least was territory he understood. Not because of the professional disruption, the firm's crisis communications, the careful management of what could and could not be disclosed to clients. Those things were difficult but navigable. What was hardest was the particular silence of a house from which someone has been removed. Marion was taken in for questioning on the 4th day. She was not arrested immediately. The evidence required time to be processed and verified. The Crown required time to review, and the legal machinery moved at its own pace. But she did not come home that night, or the night after. Her sister came and collected some of her things. A lawyer whom Lawrence did not know appeared in connection with her file. Lawrence went to the office. He came home. He sat at the kitchen table where they had talked until midnight. He drank his tea alone. He thought about the year that had passed. He thought about the distance that had settled between them. He thought about the equity fund dissolution, the years of difficult cases that had kept him in the office until 9 or 10 at night, the weekends, swallowed by files and phone calls, the accumulated absences that he had always assumed Marion. Understood because she was Marion and she knew who he was. He thought about how wrong a person can be about what another person understands. He did not hate her. He found, to his own surprise, that he could not. Yes, he did. He had built 31 years of professional discipline around the idea that people were capable of almost anything when pressed hard enough against the walls of their own lives, and that understanding this did not require excusing it. He applied that same discipline now, with varying success, to the situation in his kitchen. Curtis Beale was arrested 11 days after the device was found. He had made the mistake of using the same prepaid number twice. The two men Noah had seen in the parking garage were identified through security footage from a building across the street. They were arrested separately, one in Mississauga and one in Hamilton, within 48 hours of each other. The case against Marion took longer to build and was more complicated. The evidence was largely circumstantial and digital, messages sent through encrypted applications, a payment trail that required forensic accounting to untangle, phone records that placed her in contact with Beale during the months the plot had been developing. Her lawyer was good. The process was slow. Lawrence did not attend the trial. His testimony was given in deposition. He was advised by his own counsel to maintain distance from the proceedings, and he did. What he did instead, in the months while the case moved through the courts, was think about what he wanted the rest of his life to look like. He reduced his caseload. He delegated more. He stopped staying at the office until 9 o'clock. He had dinner with friends he had not seen in years. He learned, late and imperfectly, to sit in his own house without needing to fill the silence with work. He thought about Noah sometimes, about a boy crouching behind a concrete planter, waiting for an uncle who was late, watching the world with careful eyes, about a choice made in an instant, not a heroic one, not a calculated one, just a small human one. You're a person. Marion was convicted on 2 counts. The sentencing was reported briefly in the papers and then was not. On the day the verdict came in, Lawrence drove himself to the firm in the new car he had bought in February. He parked on level 3. He rode the elevator down and walked through the lobby and nodded to the security guard at the desk and took the stairs up to his office on the 14th floor, because the doctor had told him to take more stairs. He sat at his desk and opened the files for the day and began to work. In the early afternoon, his assistant, Priyanka, not the Priya in the list, a different woman entirely, whom he had hired in March, knocked on his door and told him that a delivery had arrived. A small package wrapped in brown paper with his name on the front in a child's handwriting. Inside was a drawing. It was done in crayon, and it showed 2 figures crouching behind what appeared to be a very large plant. One was tall, one was small. Above them, in careful printed letters, it said, "We did it." There was no note, just a phone number written on the back of the paper in an adult's handwriting. Lawrence looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he set it against the base of his desk lamp where he could see it. He reached for his phone.